Okay, we're picking up chapter 9, the second part of it, on page 221. They're in the middle of an atomic bomb drill at the school, and Mrs. Baker's just about had it with these drills. She goes into the coat room and apparently knocks over the cider, the crock of cider that's been sitting up there forever, and it smells terrible. They get the custodian in to clean it up, and he says, "You can't stay in here with this smell and with this mess," okay? So we wonder if Mrs. Baker actually intentionally caused the crock of cider to fall, right? She wanted to get out of there. Okay. "Do you think so?" said Mrs. Baker. She looked at me. "Then we shall have to go on a field trip." "A field trip?" I said. "We are going to survey points of local architectural interest." I thought for a minute. Are there any? Mrs. Baker had pulled her white sneakers out from her lower desk drawer. She looked up at me. "Yes," she said. We walked together to the main administrative office, where all the secretaries were scrunched up under their desks, and Mrs. Baker explained to Mrs. Sidman that our classrooms smelled like a brewery, and that she certainly did not think that she could keep a student there, and that she would like to take the opportunity to go on a field trip while Mr. Van Larry cleaned the room. Mrs. Sidman had one eyebrow raised the entire time she was listening, but Mrs. Baker had her arms crossed, and you know how convincing that can be. So Mrs. Sidman agreed, and Mrs. Baker filled out a form, and one of the secretaries crawled out from beneath her desk and called my mother, and then we got into Mrs. Baker's car, and she drove me around and showed me all the points of local architectural interest. We crossed over the Long Island Expressway to the north side of town and meandered down side roads until we stopped beside the Quaker Meeting House. This was built in 1676. Think of that, Holling. When it was built, people were still living who had been alive when Shakespeare was alive. 150 years ago, it was a station on the Underground Railroad. Escaped slaves hid right here. Okay, the Quakers were a religious group, right? And they actually had a strong aversion to slavery. They did not believe that slavery was right, and they allowed their church house to be used for a station for the Underground Railroad. And if you remember your U.S. history, an Underground Railroad is actually not a railroad. That was a path or a system, rather, that people took to escape from slavery. So pretty exciting stuff. Okay. We meandered down more side roads. "That's the first jailhouse on Long Island," Mrs. Baker said. "It has 2 cells, one for," top of page 222, "one for men and one for women. The first man to occupy the cell had stolen a horse. The first woman had refused to pay the church tax because she was not a member of the church. She wanted to define freedom for herself. Think of that. You can see the bars in the windows where she would have looked out. We drove out to the east side of town and circled Hicks Park. This has changed a great deal over the years, but it was once Hicks Common, where the first settlers of the town grazed their cows and sheep. Those larger oaks, no, the oaks, Holling, over there, were probably saplings then, and the building backing up against the park, that clapboard building there, is St. Paul's Episcopal School, where British soldiers were housed during the American Revolution. The silver communion ware it owns was made by Paul Revere, one of the original Hicks family members hid it in a cellar so it wouldn't be stolen during the war. Okay, this is all really cool stuff, right? And you have to remember, New York State is a lot older than our state out here in the West, right? Like that part of the country was settled long before this part of the country. So it has, a lot richer history. We have the Quaker Meeting House there. We've got the site of the Underground Railroad. Paul Revere, he was the one who yelled, "The British are coming. The British are coming," before the Revolutionary War, or at the time of the Revolutionary War. On the south side of town, we passed Temple Emmanuel. "That is the 4th temple on that same site," said Mrs. Baker. "The first building was burned by lightning. The second by British soldiers who found out the congregation was supporting the revolution. And the third by arsonists." That's those people who light things on fire on purpose. "In all those fires, the ark holding the Torah was never damaged. It's still there today." Okay, so the Torah is a part of the Bible. And so they had the ark that held it, and it was never damaged in those fires. Pretty wild. And on the west, on the far outskirts of town, we drove past what looked like a garden shed. The first abolitionist school, Mrs. Baker said. Okay, so abolition means to get rid of. So they're talking about when slavery was gotten rid of. So this is the first abolitionist school. So a school for children who would have been slaves. The first abolitionist school, Mrs. Baker said, where Negro children would come to learn to read and write, and so escape the ignorance that slavery wanted to impose. Right there, Holling, is the true beginning of the end of slavery. I never knew a building could hold so much inside. Okay, so Holling's starting to understand how significant these places are, right? He's really impressed by this. On a bright blue day when there wasn't an atomic bomb on any horizon, when the high clouds were painted on blue canvas, when tulips were standing at attention and azaleas were blooming, top of page 223, except for the ones in front of the perfect house, and dogs were barking at all the new smells, I saw my town as if I had just arrived. It was as if I was waking up. You see houses and buildings every day, and you walk by them on your way to something else, and you hardly see. You hardly notice they're even there, mostly because there's something else going on right in front of your face. But when the town itself becomes the thing that is going on right in front of your face, it all changes. And you're not just looking at a house, but at what's happened in that house before you were born. That afternoon, driving with Mrs. Baker, the American Revolution was here. The escaped slaves were here. The abolitionists were here. And I was here. It made me feel sort of responsible. Before we got back to Camillo Junior High, we passed St. Adalbert's, built almost a century ago with the pennies of Italian immigrants, said Mrs. Baker. Let's go in, I said. Mrs. Baker paused. Would your parents approve? She asked. Okay, so remember, this whole book has made it clear that St. Adalbert's is a Catholic church, is Holling Catholic. No, he's not. He's Presbyterian, right? So that's why Mrs. Baker's asking, would your parents approve of that? Would they be okay with that? She asked. It's a point of local architectural interest, I said. So we went in. It was the first Catholic church I'd ever been inside, mostly because Catholic churches are supposed to be filled with idols and smoking incense that would make you so woozy that you'd give in and start praying on your knees, which Presbyterians know is something that should not be done. Okay, so he's kind of highlighting the differences between his faith and that of the Catholic Church. But it wasn't like that at all. We came in, Mrs. Baker dropped some money into the offering box, and we walked down the main aisle. The afternoon light slanted down through the high windows, so that up close to the ceiling the air was flecked with glowing gold specks. Down below, top of page 224, down below where we were, it was shadowy and warm. I ran my hand over the dark wood of the pews, worn, smooth. Okay, the pews are the benches, the long benches that people sit in a church. There was no carpet, so we could hear our own footsteps as we walked toward the altar, where a crucifix hung suspended, a pale white Christ with bright red wounds. For 100 years, people have been coming together in this dark, I thought, breathing quietly and evenly. For 100 years. It made me wonder. Mrs. Baker, I said. Yes, Holly. I have a question. Yes? It doesn't have anything to do with points of local architectural interest. That's all right. After the game at Yankee Stadium, when Mel Stottlemyre took you up to meet the boss, did you ask him to have Kowalski and Associates do the renovations so that Marilee could stay? A pause. Whether or not I spoke about the renovations to Yankee Stadium is not something you need to know, Holly. Then I have a second question. Does this one have anything to do with points of local architectural interest? Yes. What is it? If an atomic bomb drops on Camillo Junior High, everything we've seen today will be gone, won't it? Another long pause. Yes, she said finally, top of page 225. And it really doesn't matter if we're under our desks with our hands over our heads or not, does it? No, said Mrs. Baker. It really doesn't matter. So why are we practicing? She thought for a minute. Because It gives comfort, she said. People like to think that if they're prepared, then nothing bad can really happen. And perhaps we practice because we feel as if there's nothing else we can do. Because sometimes it feels as if life is governed by the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. In other words, you don't have control over what could happen. Is there anything else we can do? She smiled. Not a teacher smile. So he's saying a real smile here. 2 things, she said. First, learn to diagram sentences. And it is rude to roll your eyes, Holling. Learn everything you can, everything. And then use all that you have learned to grow up to be a wise and good man. That's the first thing. Okay, she's giving really great advice here, and not just teacher advice. She's giving him advice for a good life, right? As for the second, I lit a candle in a Catholic church for the first time that afternoon. I guess we're not going to hear what the second thing is, right? I wonder if we'll find that out. I don't know. I lit a candle in a Catholic church for the first time that afternoon. Me, a Presbyterian. I lit a candle in the warm, dark, waxy-smelling air of St. Adalbert's. I put it beside the one that Mrs. Baker lit. I don't know what she prayed for, but I prayed that no atomic bomb would ever drop on Camillo Junior High, or the Quaker Meeting House, or the old jail, or Temple Emmanuel, or Hicks Park, or St. Paul's Episcopal School, or St. Adalbert's. I prayed for Lieutenant Baker, missing in action somewhere in the jungles of Vietnam near Khe Sanh. I prayed for Danny Hupfer, sweating it out in Hebrew school right then. I prayed for my sister, driving in a yellow bug toward California, or maybe she was there already, trying to find herself. And I hoped that it was okay to pray for a bunch of things with one candle. Top of page 226. That afternoon, when I came back home, the station wagon was gone, and the Mustang was gone, and the whole house was empty. Even the mailbox was empty, except for a flyer for my sister from the Robert Kennedy campaign, announcing that he would be stopping on Long Island before the New York primary. My sister would have flipped. And I realized that the biggest part of the empty in the house was my sister being gone. Maybe the first time that you know you really care about something is when you think about it not being there, and you really know, that the emptiness is as much inside you as outside you. For it so falls out that what we have we prize not to be, what we have we prize not to the worthwhiles we enjoy it, but being lacked and lost, why? Then we rack the value. Then we find the virtue that possession would not show us while it was ours. In other words, you appreciate things when they're gone. That's when I knew for the first time that I really did love my sister. But I didn't know if I wanted more for her to come back or for her to find whatever it was she was trying to find. See, this is the kind of stuff you start to think about when you're reading Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. You just can't help being kind of melancholy. Even though if you had to play him on stage at the Festival Theater, at least you'd be a prince and wearing a black cape instead of being a fairy and wearing yellow tights. And that's why, when my sister called that night, long after my mother and father had gone to bed, when she knew that I would be the only one awake to pick up the phone, I started to cry right away. And she did too. Both of us not saying anything, just crying into the telephone. What jerks. Top of page 227. Somewhere in between all the crying, I heard that she was in Minneapolis, which I guess is on the way to California. Yeah, so she's in Minnesota. She's only about maybe a third of the way to California, which I guess is on the way to California, that she was alone, that she had exactly $4 left in her pocket, that she didn't know what she was going to do since a bus ticket to New York City cost $44.55, that I couldn't ever tell Dad or Mom that she called because she couldn't bear to hear what they would say to her, and she wasn't sure if they would even say anything to her. And what was she going to do now? I guess she hadn't found herself. "Where are you?" I said. "In the bus station. How else do you think I'd know that a ticket to New York City costs $44.55? Is there a Western Union window there?" "Of course there's a Western Union window here. All bus stations have a Western Union window." She paused a moment. I guess she was looking around. Calling? Yes. I don't see a Western Union window here. The operator told us that we were almost out of time and we should deposit 35 cents for another 3 minutes. Okay, Western Union is a company that can transfer things. They like send things, or you can send payments through Western Union. Okay. I don't have any more coins, yelled my sister. Okay, so back then you could like prepay for phone calls. They didn't have cell phones, obviously, but they had pay phones and you could call. You'd have to pay for your calling time. I don't have any more coins, yelled my sister. Get to the nearest Western Union station tomorrow morning, I said quickly. Then the phone went dead. All because of a stupid 35 cents in coins. Like Bell Telephone was going to go bankrupt because of one phone call from Minneapolis to Long Island in the middle of the night. I didn't know if my sister had heard what I'd said at the end, but the next morning I was waiting outside the Commerce Bank. Waiting outside the Commerce Bank on, I'm not kidding here, Commerce Street, when it opened at 10 o'clock. This may not sound like a big deal, but if you knew that, top of page 228, if you knew that Commerce Street was only a block over from Lee Avenue and that I'd been hiding from eyes that would have wondered why I wasn't in Camillo Junior High for the last hour, you'd be impressed. I handed my $100 Salisbury Park savings bond to the teller. Aren't you supposed to be in school? She said. I'm a little worried that an atomic bomb might drop on it, I said. That probably the school will make it through the day, she said. What do you want to do with this bond? I need to turn it in for cash. She looked at the date. If you turn it in for cash now, you'll only get $52. If you hold on to it in just a few years, it will be worth $100. I don't have a few years, I said. Because of the atomic bomb? No. She turned the savings bond over and looked at it again. Do your parents know that you're cashing this in? Yes, I said. I know. You don't have to tell me. Right? Is he telling the truth here? No, of course he's not, right? He's saying, I know, I'm lying. I told a lie. The teller fingered the savings bond. All right, she said finally, $52. I hope you're going to do something worthwhile with the money. What's he going to do with the money, guys? I nodded, and she counted the bills out onto the counter. Further down on Commerce Street was the Western Union. I put the money up on the counter. I need to send all this cash to Minneapolis, I said. It's going for a visit, is it? Said the Western Union man. This was worse than a teacher joke. This was even worse than a nurse joke. Top of page 229. I need to send it to my sister. The Western Union man counted it out. That's a lot of money, he said. Where are you sending it exactly? To the Western Union closest to the Minneapolis bus station. Huh, he said. He pulled out a directory and thumbed through it. It took about half an hour before he found Minneapolis. Well, he said slowly, taking his glasses off, looks like they've got 2 bus stations. There's the one on Heather Avenue, and there's the one on LaSalle. Heather Avenue, I said. Send it to the one on Heather Avenue. Oh, wow. I wonder, he is very decisive about that. I wonder why. The Western Union man put his glasses back on. It'll cost you $1.75, he said. Fine. And what's the name of the recipient? I told him. And oh man, I still don't get to hear his sister's name. I told him. He tells the name of the recipient. And he took the money and sent $50.25 to Minneapolis, Minnesota, to a Western Union station on Heather Avenue, even though I didn't know if my sister was at that station or if she even knew that money was coming. I thought of her sitting alone in a place where everyone else was going somewhere, or wandering the streets of Minneapolis, looking for a way to come home to a place that was emptier without her. Sort of like Hamlet, who, more than anything, needed to find a home because he sure couldn't find himself. I spent the afternoon hiding around town, which is not easy, since this isn't that big a town, and it would take a whole lot less than an atomic bomb to make it disappear, and since anyone who saw me might tell the Chamber of Commerce businessman of 1967 or Mrs. Baker. And if either of them heard, well, put me under that bomb. He's like, man, I'd be dead if they found out. Top of page 230. I waited for a call from my sister that night, but it didn't come until late Friday night from Chicago. On the way. On Saturday morning, I told my parents at breakfast that my sister would be at the Port Authority in New York at 10:50 that morning. They looked at me like I had just chanted Hebrew. She'll be in the Port Authority at 10:50, repeated my mother. Her hand was up to her mouth, and her eyes suddenly filled. Yes, I said, because Mom is starting to cry, right? Like she loves her daughter. She wants her daughter back. Yes, I said. How was she going to get home from there? Asked my father. I guess she was hoping you would go and pick her up. Of course, said my father. Of course I'll drop everything and pick her up. Of course I have nothing else to do. He stood up. If she went out in a yellow bug, she can come home in a yellow bug. She's alone, I said. You're not going to see me driving all the way into the city on a Saturday. She can take the train. She may be out of money. Well, whose problem is that? He said. It doesn't matter whose problem it is. She can't get back home unless you go get her, I said. He looked at me. Who do you think you're talking to? He said. She needs help. Then you go get her, Holling. The car keys are up on my dresser. He laughed. Okay, I said. Okay, he said, and he went outside to start up the lawnmower. I went upstairs and got the car keys. The Ford Mustang car keys, not the station wagon. Okay, he's got the keys to the Mustang. Top of page 231. Holling, said my mother when I came back down. I think he was being sarcastic. I went to the front closet and found my jacket. Holling, what are you doing? I held up the car keys. I'm driving into New York City to pick up my sister from the Port Authority bus terminal at 10:50. You don't know how to drive. I've seen movies. I went to the front door. Holling, said my mother. I turned around. You can't drive in by yourself. Then come with me. She looked out to the backyard. We can't do that either, she said, and her voice was as sad and lost as loneliness. Okay, wow, there's a lot going on here, right? This dynamic where Mom is knowing that Dad would not approve of this, and yeah, pretty tough stuff. I went out to the garage and sat in the Mustang. The red leather still smelled new. The steering wheel felt right in my hands. It wasn't like I'd never driven before. My mother had let me drive the station wagon around parking lots, the big ones down at Jones Beach, where you can go for 2 or 3 miles before you hit anything more dangerous than a seagull. I'd gotten out of first gear plenty of times, and even up into third gear twice, and the Mustang was smaller and handier than the station wagon. I probably just had to think about turning, and the car would feel it. Okay, so he's talking about driving a stick shift here. There's no way he could get to New York City, right, if that's the limited knowledge that he has of driving. But driving around Jones Beach parking lots is a whole lot different from driving on the Long Island Expressway into New York City. And even if I could get onto the expressway, I wouldn't know what exit to get off. Toads, beetles, bats. I came back inside. I threw the keys on the kitchen counter. Top of page 232. My mother was putting out a cigarette and starting to make pound cake for lunch. Outside, the mower fussed at the edges of the lawn. I went into the living room and sat down on the couch. And Mara Lee called, because her father was going into Yankee Stadium. Would I like to come? Can I get to the Port Authority from Yankee Stadium? I said. Mara Lee asked her father. It's too far, but he says that if you can leave right now, we'll have just enough time to drop you off. She was quiet a moment. I think he feels like he owes you something, she said. I went into the kitchen. Does he owe her something? Does Mr. Kowalski owe something to Holling? I went into the kitchen. I need money for 2 train tickets, I said. Train tickets? My mother said. And money for 2 lunches. She stared at me. Big lunches, I said. She went upstairs for her pocketbook. Okay, Mom is going to help him out, right? Mom's like, all right, I may not be able to go drive to pick up sister, but I can help you do it. Okay, I was there when the bus from Chicago pulled in at 10:50. The Port Authority was all noise and rushing. The accumulated combustion from the buses had thickened the air. The whoosh and the squeak and the hollering of the brakes and the distorted announcements over the PA system and the newsboys hawking and the pell-mell of more bodies than belong in any one building gave the place a general roar. As for the floor, you couldn't have found a greater confusion if the ceiling had been lifted off and the sky had rained down ticket stubs and newspapers and Baby Ruth wrappers. Top of page 233. But as soon as the 10:50 bus from Chicago parked itself, everything stopped. The rush, the roar, the squeak, the whoosh, they all stopped. Really. Like Leonid Brezhnev had sent over an atomic bomb and wiped it all out. They did not start up again until my sister got off the bus, and she ran out of the diesel combustion and right to me, and we held each other, and we were not empty at all. Okay. Wow, that's very sweet, right? And really, this is Holling imagining that as his sister gets off, the world stops, right? Like this is a big deal to him. Holling, she said, I was so afraid I wouldn't find you. It was standing right here, Heather, I said. I'll always be standing right here. Okay, that's sweet. That's his way of saying, I'm always going to be here for you. Wow, pretty cool. Have we found out his sister's name? Yes, we have. Heather, I said. I'll always be standing right here. Okay, why did the author do this? Why did Holling never mention his sister's name until now? Make an inference. Why did that happen? But now he does. He calls her by name. I think that they're moving into a new relationship, right? Previous to this, she was always fighting with his dad and with him, with Holling. She's always, calling him names and giving him a hard time. And they have realized they really do care about each other, right? They are important to each other. So a new relationship has been formed here. For lunch, we had grilled cheese sandwiches and Cokes and chocolate donuts at a counter in the Port Authority. Outside, we bought pretzels from a stand, and then we walked to Central Park, hand in hand. We lay down in the sheep meadow, and my sister told me about driving west with the sun on your face. We got up and walked around the pond and stopped at an outcropping of boulders that fell out of the woods. Around us was every shade of green you could ever hope to imagine, broken up here and there with a flowering tree blushing to a light pink. All the colors were garbled and reflected in the tiny ripples of the water. Then through the wandering paths of the ramble, looking as if we were up in the mountains of California, and then across Bethesda Terrace, where we sat on the stone walls and traced the carvings with our fingers until someone hollered at us to get off there. Then back along the mall underneath tall elms, until we passed the statue of, no kidding, William Shakespeare, who stared down at us sternly, probably because he is wearing tights and is embarrassed doing that in front of everybody. Okay, here's Holling's great sense of humor, right? When it mentions the mall, like we think of the mall nowadays as a building with shops inside it, but a mall is also a long stretch that you could, like a long pathway, a long area that you can walk along. We walked slowly. We talked a little. I told her about our atomic, top of page 234, our atomic bomb drills and about our town and about the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. She told me about Minneapolis and how she got out of the yellow bug and wouldn't get back in and how Chit drove away and about going to the Western Union and finding the money for the ticket and falling asleep for the first time in 2 days on the bus to Chicago. But mostly we didn't talk. It was spring in Central Park, and being there with my sister was enough. We took the train out of the city and walked from the station. When we got home, it didn't matter that my mother had made us burned grilled cheese sandwiches for supper. It was just so good that the house wasn't empty anymore. My father said only one thing during supper. "Did you find yourself?" "What?" said my sister. "Did you find yourself?" "She found me," I said. By the end of the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, Laertes is stabbed, the queen is poisoned, and the king is poisoned and stabbed, which is pretty much the same thing that happens to Hamlet. By the time it's all over, there are these dead bodies all over the stage, and even though Horatio is hoping that flights of angels are coming to sing Hamlet to his rest, it's hard to believe there's any rest for him. Maybe he knew that. Maybe that's why he dressed in black all the time. Maybe it's why he was never happy. Maybe he looked in the wrong places, trying to find himself. Or maybe he never had someone to tell him that he didn't need to find himself. He just needed to let himself be found. That's what I think Shakespeare was trying to say about what top of page 235, about what it means to be a human being in the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. And speaking of being found, that's what happened to Lieutenant Baker, too. Really. After almost 3 months in the jungles of Vietnam, he got found. Okay, remember, this is Mrs. Baker's husband. I was there on the last Wednesday afternoon of May, a cool and blue day, when Mrs. Sidman came in with an envelope and handed it to Mrs. Baker. She took it with hands that were trembling. She tore the top slowly open and then stood there, holding the telegram, unable to pull it out to read it. Can I help? Said Mrs. Sidman. Mrs. Baker nodded. Okay, she's just taken over with emotion. And then I'll take Holling to my office so that you can be alone. Mrs. Baker looked at me, and I knew she wasn't going to send me to Mrs. Sidman's office so that she could be alone. You don't send someone away who has lit a candle with you. I suppose not, said Mrs. Baker. Mrs. Sidman took the envelope, then held out the opened telegram to Mrs. Baker. But Mrs. Baker closed her eyes. Read it, she whispered. Mrs. Sidman looked at me, then down at the telegram. Then she read the first line. Sweet eyes. Stop. Okay, so in telegrams, they have these little stops, like between lines, okay? Think of the sound you make when you let go after holding your breath for a very, very long time. Think of the gladdest sounds you know. The sound of dawn on the first day of spring break. The sound of a bottle of Coke opening. The sound of a crowd cheering in your ears because you're coming down to the last part of a race. Top of page 236. And you're ahead. Think of the sound of water over stones in a cold stream and the sound of wind through green trees on a late May afternoon in Central Park. Think of the sound of a bus coming into the station carrying someone you love. Then put all those together, and they would be nothing compared to the sound that Mrs. Baker made that day from somewhere deep inside that had almost given up when she heard the first line of that telegram. Then she started to hiccup and to cry and to laugh, and Mrs. Sidman put the telegram down, held Mrs. Baker in her arms, nodded to me, and took her out of the classroom for a drink of water. And I know I shouldn't have, but I picked up the telegram and read the rest. Here is what it said. Sweet eyes, stop. Out of jungle, stop. Okay, stop. Home in time for strawberries, stop. Love, T.Y., stop. Shakespeare couldn't write any better than that.